Here we go. Yehudah Atah. Quick recap, going all the way back. We're looking at the verse that came from the blessing that Yaakov gave to his son Yehudah of Yehudah Atah Yeducha Achecha Yatcha Ba'arf Avecha. Yehudah, as for you, your brothers will acknowledge you, your hand will be at the nape of your enemies. So first we went through the whole thing with just the beginning part of it. Your brothers will acknowledge you. That's because the brothers that come before you, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, they're all steps in divine service that lead to the level of Yehudah. Reuven is the language of seeing, right? That's where the name Reuven actually comes from, is seeing. It's a language of love and closeness. When you see, it brings about wanting, basically. So I want to draw closer to you. I want to be closer to you. That's Reuven. Shimon is hearing, which is, it's a divine service that comes from fear because it connotes distance. When you hear something, that means you're not necessarily close enough to have seen it, number one. And also, it's a different sort of remove because seeing, you're more part of it. That means like I was there for it. Hearing means that you have to hear it told either because you're too far away to have seen it, or you have to hear it told over. So that's why it relates to fear, because fear is drawing back, stepping back. Who am I before God's greatness? Who am I to say like, oh, I just want you and so small before you? That's Shimon, in a nutshell. Then we go to Levi. Levi is the language of attachment, unification. As that occurs through Torah study. We actually are unified and attached to God because Torah is from God's wisdom, and learning Torah unites us with God's wisdom. That's a self, more close part of like who you are kind of thing. That's Levi. Levi is attachment. And we see how also in davening, these three levels, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are different parts of Shema, which leads us to the level of Yehudah, which is the Amidah prayer. Much higher, holier kind of prayer than the levels leading up to it. But we need those other three to get to this fourth level. These are steps on the rung of the ladder. And not just, oh, love God, but like obviously this intense feeling of love for God, intense feeling of fear or awe toward God, this intense feeling of wanting to attach to God. That leads us to this level of Yehudah, which is Hapam Odas Hashem. This time I'm going to thank God, not because I wasn't going to thank God before, but this time I'm going to thank God because I've gotten to a level that was unexpected. I've gotten to a level now that's beyond what the mind can comprehend on its own. That's what the level of Yehudah is. Acknowledgement and thanks and praise, etc. But it's a level that goes beyond what your own mind can reach. Even maximizing the mind. All the levels that come before, these are levels that are still within the rational mind. Obviously taking it to great levels, but that's what these are. Yehudah is a step above that. It goes beyond that. It's going beyond ourselves. That's what Yehudah is. And then we got to this whole thing about how the world stands on three pillars. Torah, Torah, divine service, deeds of kindness. And we said the brothers relate to this also. Okay, well, Torah we know is Levi. Service of God we said is prayer, which is a time for great introspection, which is considered parallel to fear and stuff like that because it's self-discipline, refining the self. And then deeds of kindness, of course, is Reuven because love is and kindness, that is the root of kindness is love. Then we got back to the level of Yehudah, even though the level of Yehudah is this great, very high level, and it's a level of, requires a sort of submission of a servant before the master, as in it's a total giving over of the self sort of thing. Self-nullification. And by self-nullification, it means I'm putting aside myself. It's self-set-asideness, kind of is what it is. Whatever I want is not as important as what God wants for me. And whatever God wants for me is way more important than whatever I want. So that's the level to try to strive for, because that's a level beyond my own self, beyond my own reason and understanding. Because even if God asks for something that doesn't make any sense, because what he wants is so important, because I'm so given over to him, I'm going to do it. And then we have this whole thing that Yehudah, we have the yud in front of it because it's a state of constancy, that it's always within us. As in this level that's beyond our own reason and rationale, we can reach it because it's always part of us. It's always there. It's just a matter of whether or not we can dig down deep enough or remove the layers enough to actually get to it. That's part of what occurs through the service of the other brothers. It brings us closer toward achieving this level. So it's not just something that we have to create, it's something that we could actually unearth kind of within ourselves. That was the first part that we focused on. And then the second part of the verse of Yatcha Ba'arf Avecha, that your hand will be at the nape of your enemies, it's a physical reference of you're going to be victorious over your enemies, and it's also a spiritual reference. Those things which seem to be enemies to your spiritual mission, you'll also be victorious over them. Basically, physical needs. Physical needs, when they become impediments, then they can impede us. Physical needs can impede us when they become things that we start chasing after the physical, that takes away our attention, that takes away our efforts and energies from spiritual pursuits, which is what it's all about. So it becomes an enemy to us because it becomes detrimental to our spiritual mission. So even that, not only are we going to be victorious over it, but we'll be able to use that for the furtherance of the spiritual. Remember that also, we had a lot of Tanya. It's not about the physical world, it's not about beating it and destroying it. It's about how to use it for spiritual. This is all here to help us. So how can we use this to help us to achieve what we have to achieve? And then we went a little bit further into it, where we started talking about, and this is where we left off last time, is that when you look at the verses that follow that first verse, we see that the next two verses that come afterwards are talking about the future time. David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech. So you have King David and King Solomon, and then also there's a reference to Mashiach. What is that? So it's not just that, oh, when Mashiach comes, you're going to reach these levels. Because this verse of Yehudah Atah Yeducha Achecha, that your brothers are going to acknowledge you, and your hand's going to be at the nape of your enemies, is said before the verses that talk about the future. Meaning that even though we're not yet in Mashiach's times, from what we can see, we can still achieve these levels. It's not something we have to wait for Mashiach to come to reach this incredibly high level, of the submission, acknowledgement, the self-nullification before God, the level of Yehudah in divine service, but also using the physical in service to the spiritual. These are things that we could achieve before Messianic times. Wrapping up the Maamar, it continues a little bit more on that. It just kind of goes more talking about king. He's the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Mashiach. So I have David Melech Aleim, my servant David shall be king over them. David Avdi Nasi Lam Leolam, and my servant David shall be either leader forever. The Davidic line will be forever, for all times, and that specifically connects to also Messianic times, because Mashiach comes from David. By the way, these two verses that we just said, they connected to the week's Parsha, or maybe the Haftorah, that was said the week that this Maamar was delivered. So that's kind of like why they were stuck in here. So it's kind of stuck in here to see, we have further proof talking about King David and all that sort of stuff. Rambam tells us when Mashiach comes, Mashiach will wage the wars of God and be victorious. So he tells us that he's going to wage the wars of God, and he's going to build the Beis HaMikdash and gather all from exile. As in, this is the order that things will occur. First, Mashiach's going to come. He's going to fight the wars of God, bring peace about all the land, destroy the evil and that kind of stuff. And then he's going to build the Beis HaMikdash and bring everybody from exile. As in, we see the order of things occurring, which, again, is just to emphasize about how we could achieve certain things even before this occurs. Going on with that, we also have through the revelations of Yehudah, which is a name for all the Jewish people. Jew comes from Yehudah. For a long time, we used to be called Hebrews. It came from Avraham Me'ever Lenar, that Avram came from across the river. So it was like a double thing. It came from the other side of the river in the Mesopotamia, wherever it was. Oh, that guy's from the other side of the river. But it's also a way of saying, like, oh, that guy stands on the other side of things. As in, that guy has different beliefs than the rest of us. For ages and ages, the Jewish people were called Ivrim, Hebrews. We only start to be called Jews, like Yehudim, Yehudi, only started kind of in the times of Purim. Because by that time, the Jewish people had gone to exile. Whatever you know from the history, you had the 12 tribes lived in the land of Israel. The 10 tribes were exiled, and we don't know what happened to them. The lost tribes of Israel, 10 tribes. So after that, you only had 2 tribes, but also Levi and the Kohanim. Joseph's sons, they each got a portion. So that's how you still have 12, even though Levi did not get a portion. So Yehudah and Binyamin, those are the 2 tribes that were left, and then you had the Beis HaMikdash. So you had the Levim and the Kohanim. Anybody who says today, knows today that they're a Levi and a Kohen, that is a chain that goes all the way back to temple times. Well, and before that even. Because when the 10 tribes were exiled, and we don't know, obviously there were some scattered ones who lived in the south, but Yehudah is the dominant tribe, so they became known as the Jews. They became known as Yehudi. When they went into exile, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, those 2/3 tribes that went into exile. All the history of the Jewish people that happened after that happens with these 3 tribes. Because the 10 tribes are lost. We don't know what happened to them. The tribe of Yehudah, the tribe of Binyamin, and then tribe of Levi. That's it. First they went to Babylon, and then Babylon got conquered by Persia. And then you have the whole Persian story. That's the first time you're going to find the word Yehudi used. Mordechai ish Yehudi. The Yehudi man. So what does that mean? That's when we started to be called Yehudim. And it has that name a few times in the Megillah. Fun fact. So anyway, go back to this. Through the revelations of Yehudah, which is a name for all the Jewish people. See, now we're still called Jews now, and this is where it comes from. From Judah. We became Jews from Judah. To the extent of affecting the thought, speech, and action, your enemies will fall before you, even before Mashiach's arrival. Remember, thought, speech, and action. This is what we have control over. These are the soul's garments. So what we want is for the level of Yehudah to encompass, affect, be at the forefront of our thought, speech, and action. When we can achieve this, that we have such a deep permeation of this level of Yehudah, then our enemies fall before us, even before Mashiach's arrival. But we talk about enemies, we talk about anything that's going to impede us from fulfilling our divine mission. So it could be any sort of temptation or desire, or actually a person. Anybody who's trying to shut down the godly mission, basically. You have that here also. This is from a verse. It's from the book of Vayikra. There also tells us, it says, follow my statutes and observe my commandments. If we shall do as such, your enemies will fall before you. When we totally devote ourselves and commit ourselves to a godly life, then nothing can stand in our way. My grandfather used to call it, you have to have an inferiority complex. Anybody who stands in the way of your divine mission is inferior to you. Anyone or anything, that becomes inferior. Because you don't get to block the divine mission. Or that doesn't mean we have to become a steamroller, of course. But the point is, you don't let anything stop you from, we know this is what's supposed to be done. We know that God controls the world. You know something interesting? This verse, "B'chokosai telecha v'mitzvosai tishmeru." There's actually a word that comes before it. That's im. Im b'chokosai telecha. That's mitzvosai tishmeru. Im means if. Here it's only quoted. It's quoted in this maamer without the im. And there was another time when the Rebbe once gave a speech, and my grandfather used to translate. Like when he had these Lag BaOmer parades, my grandfather would translate for the Rebbe. So the Rebbe would speak in Yiddish, and then my grandfather would give the translation over for thousands of people who were there. And when he gave over the translation, he said, "Oh, this is the verse that the Rebbe said." He put the word "im" back in. This is the verse from the Torah. And afterwards, the Rebbe said, "Oh, I have a little correction for you. It's not im, because then you're saying if you follow my commandments, if you follow my statutes and observe my commandments." But of course, every single Jewish person, it's not a matter of if they're going to do it. Of course they're going to do it. Here also, the word "im" was taken out. Like, of course the Jewish people are going to do what God wants us to do. So again, when we follow through, when we follow through and we do what we're supposed to do, that says we come to a place where the enemies fall before us. It's going to draw kind of like a connection, a parallel, which you're going to see with a different verse. So we have the verse, Yehudah Atah, Yehudah, through your brothers will acknowledge you, your hand will be at the nape of your enemies. And it says that we can achieve this state even before Messianic times. How can we achieve this state before Messianic times? It seems like this is a level that can only be reached when Mashiach comes. To kind of further underline this point and to kind of prove to us that it's possible, we have a verse that says, Vayechi Yaakov Be'eretz Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt. So this is all the way at the end of the book of Bereshit, at the end of the book of Genesis. After they figure out Joseph's like, "Hey, I'm your brother. Surprise!" Remember, then they say, "Okay, go back, bring the father down," right? Remember all the Jewish people that moved to Egypt at that time to start the Egyptian exile. It tells us, though, that Yaakov, kind of at the end of his life, it says, Vayechi Yaakov Be'eretz Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt. Now, we're going to have an interesting thing, because you say that Yaakov lived. We're looking at this word of lived. How can we say that Yaakov lived, as in like he had a good life in the land of Egypt? First of all, the land of Egypt was a terrible place. So first of all, we have, again, a verse from the Torah portion. This is also from the book of Vayikra. It said, V'chai behem, you shall live in them. That's what they use when they talk about why you can be Machal Shabbos. Someone has a medical emergency on Shabbos, you could break Shabbos to save that person. It's not, oh, the laws of Shabbos have been suspended. It's you must break Shabbos to save that person. Why? Because V'chai behem, you're supposed to live in them. So we have to take care of human life for this. There's more to that explanation, but that's what it is. So we see that even in exile, and all exiles are called Egypt, not only because Egypt was the precursor, but because Egypt, the Hebrew word mitzarim is boundaries, constraints. So all exiles for the Jewish people are Egypt because we're like captives in it. It creates these kind of limitations for us that tries to hinder us from being our real selves. So even in exile, and all the exiles are called Egypt, that's considered like the prototype for exiles because that was the first one. Jewish people live, as in we have a full life, by studying Torah, which is called the Torah of life, and performing mitzvah. This is how we can actually say that you lived even in a time of exile. This is how this can actually come about. Going further, okay, so here's an interesting story. This actually comes from the Hayom Yom. The Hayom Yom means from day to day. The Rebbe compiled it. It's different teachings, different kind of anecdotes and stories, most of which were heard from his father-in-law, so the previous Rebbe. So whenever you see, like it says, my father said, it's the previous Rebbe talking about his father. The Rebbe was the 7th Rebbe, and he's writing in the name of the 6th Rebbe, who would be talking about, let's say, the 5th Rebbe. Or if he says my grandfather, he's talking about the 4th Rebbe. It's a book, it has great depth and learning to it. But this is a story, and I broke it up because that's also part of like all the verses that come with it. So we'll see, this ties everything together. So when the Tzemach Tzedek was a boy, the Tzemach Tzedek was the 3rd Chabad Rebbe. He was called the Tzemach Tzedek because of a work that he had that was called Tzemach Tzedek, so they called him by his work, which is something that's actually, it's something that occurred with a lot of great Torah scholars, that they were kind of nicknamed after their work. So the Tzemach Tzedek, the 3rd Chabad Rebbe, the grandson of the Alter Rebbe, when the Tzemach Tzedek was a boy and learned the passage, Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt. His teacher translated according to the Baal Term commentary. So obviously one of the commentators that we have. Our father Yaakov lived his 17 best years in Egypt, which 17 is the gematria, numerical value Tov. Tov, which is good, the numerical value of it is 17. So our father Yaakov lived his 17 best years in Egypt. When he returned home from Cheder, he asked his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, how can it be that our father Yaakov, the elect of the patriarchs, he is the father of the tribes, should have as the best years of his life the 17 that he lived in Egypt, the land of corruption? So when you say that Yaakov lived 17 years in the land of Egypt, and you say, oh, those are the best years he had, how is that possible? He lived in Egypt of all places. So now we're bringing the quotes. Well, who says that Egypt was such a corrupt, terrible place? So we'll tell you. And these are from different places. This is actually in Chumash. This happened when you had that Avraham. There was a famine, so we had to go once to this place, went to this place. Once he had to go to Egypt, he hid Sarah, right? Oh, say you're my sister. Because it's so beautiful, they're going to want to take her. So for the one, it says, Lama Marta, achosihi, vegachos alili, shavati hine ishtcha kachulech. Why do you say she is my sister? So that I took her to myself for wife, and now here's your wife, take her and go. Take her and go. Not like Avimelech, who said to him, here is my land before you. But he, Pharaoh, said to him, go and do not say, because the Egyptians are lascivious. When the whole story happened with Avimelech, which actually happened after the story of Paro, right? It says, but it means below as in coming up. When it happened with Avimelech, and he said, oh, why do you say she's your sister? Or you should have just said she's your wife. I want to take her. Okay, you know what? Fine, here's your wife. Go move wherever you want to move. When the whole story happened with this Pharaoh, this Paro in Egypt, every time he tried to get close to Sarah, there was an angel that would she would say hit him! He had a weird rash broke out in weird places. So he was not able to touch her basically. When Pharaoh found out about it and he said, oh, she's your wife, he says, take her and get out of here. As in, don't stick around. What's the difference? Avimelech, for his people, he was saying, my people are morally strong enough. Once they know that don't touch her, they're not going to touch her. But Pharaoh was saying, when you're going to take her out of this palace, they're like, oh, Pharaoh doesn't want her. She's fair game now. They're not going to be as morally upright as I am right now. So get out of here. When we say that Egypt was the land of corruption, it said right here in the text we see, Pharaoh said, take her and get out. Because you can't trust the people here. They're going to come after her. Even though whatever happened with me, my people they're not going to step back just because you're married to her. So that's one thing. Another thing that it tells us, it says, it says, like the practice of the land of Egypt in which you dwelled, you should not do. What does that prove anything? God told the Jewish people, don't ever be like the land of Egypt. What does it mean? So here it tells us, like the practice of the land of Egypt and like the practice of the land of Canaan. It's part of the verse, but we're focusing on Egypt now. This verse informs us that the deeds of the Egyptians and the Canaanites were more corrupt than those of all other nations. And moreover, that the Egyptians residing in that region of Egypt in which the Israelites had dwelt were the most corrupt of all. There's actually more to it. It talks about bestiality and stuff like that, and how close they used to get to their horses. Blah. But that's what it says, don't do like the land of Egypt. We're not just saying they were corrupt. Another thing, if you remember, but speaking more about the corrupt, when it talks about the 10 plagues, and it says the plague of the death of the firstborn, it says that every house had a death. There's no house that was untouched from the Egyptians. Someone died in each house. Well, how could that be? What if the firstborn moved? So there's a lot of things. One is that it could be whoever was the next is now the firstborn of the house now, so that person died. But even there also, Rashi explains he says there were a lot of kids in the same household that were not the firstborn of their mothers, but they're the firstborn of their fathers. Because the Egyptian woman would just sleep around, there were a lot of firstborns in the same household. In their days of idolatry, Egypt was not exactly the epitome, the role model for good moral behavior. A terrible place, as far as that goes. So how can you say that Yaakov, of all people, Yaakov lived his best years in the land of Egypt? How is that possible? So now let's go. This is the second part of that Yom. This is the second part of the story. What did the grandfather say? The Alter Rebbe answered, it is written, and Yehudah sent before him to Yosef to give instructions for Goshen. The Midrash states, and Rashi quotes this, Rabbi Menachem said, to establish a house of study. So the Torah would be there and the tribes would study Torah. To give instructions for Goshen means, in a deeper sense, when one learns Torah, he comes closer to the Almighty, may he be blessed. So even in Egypt, it was true to say, Vaychi, he lived. So here you see it here. Ves Yehudah shalch lefanav, laharis lefanav Goshen, vevo arza Goshen. He sent Yehudah ahead of him, Joseph to direct him to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen. What's it saying? How can you say that Yaakov lived his best years in the land of Egypt? Because before Yaakov came down to the land of Egypt, as in on the way, he sent Yehudah ahead of him to tell Joseph how to set up Goshen, which they're going to live, how to set up Goshen for them. What does that mean to set up the land of Goshen for them? To set up a school, to set up a house of Torah study. Because Torah is the Torah of life, that we should live through Torah mitzvos. That means that where we are enveloped in Torah, that where we are fully subsumed by Torah, that where we are, that we engage ourselves in Torah study, we are living. We are attached to true life. Even in a place like Egypt, even in that kind of place, even, we could still live when we are living through Torah mitzvahs, when we're living with Torah mitzvahs. We also have Shakol Kol Yaakov Vate Knesias Vate Midrashis Eni De Esav Sholtos. When the voice of Yaakov resounds in the houses of prayer and houses of study, the hands of Esav do not rule. It's actually kind of like a paraphrase of what the quote is there. But it basically says, then, if you remember when the blessings were given, when Yaakov snuck the blessings from Yitzchak, he said, Akol Kol Yaakov Edaim De Esav. The voice is the voice of Yaakov, the hands are the hands of Esav. It wasn't just, because you feel furry right now. It was also in that with the inherent characteristics of them. That Yaakov's strength is in his voice, as in through prayer, and Esav's strength is the might of the battlefield. So when the voice of Yaakov resounds in the houses of prayer and houses of study, when we actually tap into what our true selves are, then the hands of Esav do not rule. We are not conquered in that moment. We can live. We are living then, when we attach ourselves to Torah and godliness. So not only that, even more, the Jewish people are assisted with their material needs, enabling further study of Torah and fulfillment of mitzvahs in peace and prosperity, bringing Mashiach. Amen. So it's not just that preparing to be at the nape of your enemy and all that sort of stuff. It's that when we truly tap into, when we truly connect with, and when we truly unite with, and when we live the true spiritual mission, we dedicate ourselves to the true spiritual mission, we commit ourselves, this is what true life is for the Jewish person. And it's not just that when we say that, oh, your enemies are going to fall before you. It's not just like, oh, okay, so I have no more enemies anymore. It's also that all these things that seem to be the negative force in the world, not only they're not going to impede us, but they will become assistants to us in doing what we have to do. Because you could spend much more time, if you don't have any material worries or anything like that, you could study Torah in peace. You could fulfill mitzvahs in peace. All these things, not only are they no longer a hindrance to us, but they're also a help to us. This is what occurs when we truly can reach this level and we truly embrace, unite with, commit to, devote ourselves to, not just reaching the level of Yehudah, but also connecting to what our real life is, to what true life is for a Jewish person, which is Torah study and fulfillment of mitzvah.